Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Corporate Services Committee, and welcome to all of those that are doing the Diploma in Public Administration. Welcome, and I'm not sure it'll be entertaining, but I hope it's informative. So, committee, I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Morgan.
Well, I'll just echo a cautionary note that if any of the discussions on the 2018 provincial budget or federal budget submissions on number 3, or if possible, then on number 13, the submission for rapid transit to be put on the municipal election ballot, depending on how the discussions on those goes, I may end up clearing a pecuniary at that time if my employer, Western University, comes up in the discussion.
We head down that road, we'll save you from yourself. Okay, anyone else? All right, on consent items, items 2 through 7, I'll look for any that individual members want pulled. Councillor Usher.
Just like to address item number 3, and I think I have a question on item number 5.
You want 5 pulled, Councillor? Okay.
Yes, please.
Any others, Councillor Morgan?
I'd like to ask a question on 6. You may as well pull it. I'm not sure where that will lead.
You want it pulled or not?
Yes.
Okay. So 3, 5, and 6 are being pulled. If there's nothing else, I'll have a motion on 2, 4, and 7. Councillor Park.
Thank you. I just want to speak briefly on item number 7, the submission from Councillor Usher and myself. Just want to point out one amendment that we were successful at FCM with regarding, pardon me, the economic development and social development regarding the HPS. We were able to put an amendment forward that said that the advocacy would talk about maintaining what status quo is now with the top-ups that every community had. Throughout that program, there was never any certainty that the top-up created a new normal situation, so we were very proud of the work that we did there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and once again, thank you to you and Councillor Usher for representing us so well at FCM. Okay, I'll take a motion. Councillor Helmer.
I certainly support the recommendation on number 5, and so I didn't want to pull it, but I did have a question for our staff. I'm looking at the table here.
On 5, Councillor?
Yeah.
It's been pulled, so let's deal with the ones that haven't been pulled, and then we'll come back to that if you don't mind.
Thank you.
So 2, 4, and 7. Mover and a seconder. I'll call the question on those items.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, let's, we'll march through a few of these. Let's go to number 3 and Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just talk positively about item number 3, only from the perspective of the involvement of Federation of Canadian Municipalities in this budget process, FCM. And you would have read some of that in item number 7. But I wanted to bring to the fact that that FCM has been having meetings also parallel to these meetings based on what we agreed to at the board meeting in Wood Buffalo, with respect, and our CEO has had meetings with the Minister of Finance with respect to the budget for next year, and the subjects that they talked about were housing, poverty reduction, the phase 2 federal infrastructure program, cannabis legalization, and many of the things that we are talking about, but specifically the items that we are talking about here in this item number 3. So as we go to the provincial government with this, and as we go to the federal government, I just wanted to point out that we have strong support also from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which is more broad because it's talking about right across the nation. But it's trying to bring everything into perspective in time for the March budget. And in addition to that, at the Board of Directors meeting in November, we will be doing, we as a board of directors of FCM, will be doing a lot of advocacy work with the MPs and the various ministers to reinforce this and what we expect and what we want in the budget for 2018. So that's it. With that, I would certainly receive and move the recommendation as it is here in item number 3.
Thank you. I'll accept your motion. Look for a seconder. Any other speakers to this item? No other speakers? Then I'll call the question and thank our intergovernmental affairs folks for their work on this one. And not just the written thing, but there's lots of work that happens behind the scenes. So thank you for that.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, we'll turn to the annual report, item number 5, risk management services. I think Councillor Helmer and I'm not sure, Councillor Morgan, do you want to speak to this? No, Helmer, I know Councillor Van Holst as well. Okay. You pulled it? Okay, Councillor Usher, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to staff for coming up with this report. I read this report, and I know that it comes to us on a yearly basis, and I don't have a specific question, but when I look at the value of the different dollars through 2006 to 2017, claims, insurance, administration, and total, I wonder if we could have a little, I know that on a regular basis they come with the breakdown for each year, and about, I think it was the last meeting we saw all the details of the individual ones. But when we see a number like this, the 4,536,000, excluding the past 3 years, the average annual COR is 4 million.
Councillor, just for all of our benefit, could you direct us to a particular page?
Yeah, okay, sir, the first page, right down at the bottom.
On the very first, okay.
4 million. I was addressing the table at the beginning, but now I'm coming back to the individual number here. This breakdown of the 4 million, can you help me? Is that the average that I'm seeing on page 61 down in the far bottom corner? Because it says 4,536,000. I'm trying to see where the 4,536,000 come from, if I may just put it that way.
Mr. Wells, could you help us out?
Thank you, through the chair. So the first page of the report identifies an average annual cost of risk at 4.5 million. If you turn to page 61, there's a table there. And that average cost comes from years 2014 to 2006. So it excludes the most recent 3 years. And the reason it excludes those years is because they're still new. Those claims haven't matured. And so it would be an inaccurate depiction of the average annual overall cost of risk. In the table on page 61, at the bottom, it shows you an average of 4.4. That includes all years, and that's the difference.
And just if I could, the reason we're the numbers that are in the last 3 years are really maximums. Is that right? Is that a maximum exposure, or is that a guesstimation on based on experience where we'll end up?
Thank you. The last 3 years on the table, as in 2006, 2007, 2008, yeah, those are very close to ultimate numbers because there's only, in 2006, there's no more claims open.
Sorry, I'm referring to 17, 16, and 15.
Oh, those years are recent, and so there's growth to happen in the claims expense columns.
So thank you for that follow-up question. On the page in page 61, the insurance column, that's what we pay on a regular basis, regardless. Is that a cost to us, regardless? That has nothing to do with the claims.
Through the chair, that is correct. That is the insurance premiums for the city's insurance portfolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. In the report, there's some commentary about, you know, the areas that have the greatest loss, you know, identify some of the areas where we have significant cost of risk. And it talks about how, you know, feedback is provided into the service areas sort of as on an ongoing basis. So as you see claims being made and claims being paid out, there's a feedback process with people who are responsible for management and delivery of those services about how to minimize a risk. And I just wonder if you could speak a bit to that and sort of the culture of risk management in the organization and how that feedback loop kind of works.
Through the chair, thank you. We have three basic responsibilities. The division has three basic responsibilities, and loss prevention is a key one that's at the heart of everything. So when we have information that we can share with the service areas, departments, divisions, and associated boards that we've recognized through our experience in claims or just in general discussions with our peers, that will lead to managing risk and controlling risk in a better way. And then we seek out the people that benefit from that information and we deliver it to them as often as possible. We believe that controlling risk is everybody's responsibility, and we talk to as many as we can. We make sure that they have all of the people they need to have involved in the discussion so they can avoid risk, accept it if they have to, and understand what they're accepting, mitigate it, and then transfer it in any place where they can transfer it. And those are the basic principles that we try to promote throughout the corporation and everybody we deal with. Thank you.
So I'm looking at, say, 2006, where this is a year that's going to be stable, everything's done with that year. The total cost of risk in that year is $3.5 million, and there's a note in the report saying, you know, there's still some outstanding for some of the more recent years, but based on the increased cost of insurance, we could be seeing total cost of risk in excess of $6 million. That's quite a significant increase from $3.5 million, like it's in the order of 70% over 10 years. And I guess I wonder if you could speak to what is driving that trend and whether you expect that kind of growth rate to continue, or you think it's going to reach a point where it stabilizes or slows down in terms of the increase?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm going to turn to page 61, just so I have the information in front of us. So looking at the cost of risk, the thing that I find positive is that if you look at over the course of time, there is a range that it falls within. We do have a lot of responsibility. The corporation has a lot of responsibility. We have over $2 billion in insurable assets, annual budget of about $1 billion, and London's growing. So the cost of risk, not to be taken lightly, but it seems, in my mind, to be stable and reasonable in light of everything that we do, which is pretty awesome at times. Those years that I mentioned, the cost will go up. I think the cost will go up over time eventually for just about anything, but those 2 years that I highlighted were mentioned because there was increased insurance premiums during those years. If you look for 2015, the insurance premiums were $3.9 million. And because of that cost, that is going to be a key driver into an increased cost of risk for that year. Same with the previous year being 2014. It's 3.1, which is much lower than 2015, but still higher than the average. And so that too will lead to a higher cost of risk for those years if claims expenses are incurred as expected. So those 2 years will probably be noticeably higher than the others, but on the average, I think everything is in line and also favorably predictable. And if you can predict where things are going, you can plan for it. And that's what I like best. Thank you.
Okay, one more follow-up. So it looks like around 2012 is when we see an inversion where the biggest component of the cost of risk is now insurance rather than the claims expense. And do you think that particular trend is going to continue, where you've got claims expenses that are under what the insurance component of the cost of risk is?
Thank you, through the chair. The City of London was insured with an insurance company called OMEX, Ontario Municipal Insurance Exchange, and we were for 10 years or so. In the early years, the premiums were very reasonable, and over time, we received retro assessments. The retro assessments are also a component built into the annual cost here in these premiums. But with those favorable premiums in the earlier years, eventually claims experiences proved that they were unfunded for their claims, and so they had to increase premiums, and all good things must end. The premiums increased. Now, we are not with that insurance company anymore, and they no longer write business anymore. So the insurance for this year and last year are the same. If I take out the retro assessments, they are about $2.5 million. And going forward for 2018, it's expected to be 5% increase or less. And to project outside of that range, it wouldn't be proper for me to do that. So I think the one thing is the insurance premiums right now are stable for the near future. Thank you.
Okay, would someone like to move that item? I'll look for a seconder. The other thing I think that plays into some of these certainly rates is what's happening, not just our claims history, but the global. So oftentimes you get insurance losses that are outside of our control, so they have to recover that from across their book entirely. And I think certainly I know in the public sector and in the nonprofit sector that the insurances increases are very much in line with what's being experienced out there. So thank you for that. Mover and seconder, please. A question?
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, thank you. We'll do our final consent item, which is staff report on experience with new hours of service. And I believe, Councillor Morgan, you pulled this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And through the Chair, I just have a couple of questions because I appreciate the information and data in the report, and it outlined a number of the questions that I would have had. So thank you for including that. The two questions I have is one, I guess, less quantitative and more qualitative on whether administration feels like the new hours are going well and they're achieving the goals that they're set out to achieve. And two, more so on the drop-ins, because I've been here myself on Saturdays. What are the types of services that people are accessing? You know, are they coming and accessing services and making transactions and, you know, going away satisfied? I've been here while a few people have come in and observed, and I'm just wondering, like, is that a successful component of the program?
Mr. Hayward and then Ms. Livingston.
So through the chair, in terms of the degree of success, I think you can see it depends on the service. So if you look at Parks and Recreation, I think it's been very successful. If you look at some of the other areas, maybe not quite so successful in terms of the volumes of people coming through, but it's also something that we need to look at. We've only been going now for a year and a half, and if you look at the bank's experience with opening on Saturdays and Sundays, in their case, they also had a slow start in a lot of cases, and in some cases they would peel back. We've also taken a flexible approach here, so we don't provide service on Saturdays on long weekends, as an example, because the volume just wasn't there. So we have been flexible, and we are monitoring that kind of thing. Overall, you're looking at about 6,700 interactions. Those interactions can be, as it says on page 80, they can be drop-in, phone, appointment-driven. The appointment-driven ones are usually longer in terms of length. So, you know, while it may not look like there's as many people there, we're only adding a couple of hours on Tuesday and adding a full day Saturday in some cases, and that's not every service. So that's something you need to be aware of too when you're looking at this. So overall, I'd say we're doing well. We do have some next steps that we've included in the report to indicate to you where we are going, but we do need to work at this as well. So that's my comments on that. I'll throw it over to Ms. Livingston, and also she can comment on the what types of services.
Through the chair, in terms of your question around drop-in, so on a Saturday, the services that are available are through clerks and through Parks and Recreation. So for Parks and Recreation, frankly, most of that interaction is by phone. The vast majority of people are accessing that service by phone, but the folks that come in are looking for spectrum registration or facility rental. I understand through clerks, and Ms. Saunders is here, so she may wish to speak to it, that there are a number of inquiries that are directed through clerks, including people that drop in that may be seeking services that are not open on Saturday. So they're probably given that information. Your question about satisfaction, if it's not open on the Saturday, I'm not sure, but at least they would be given the information of when it would be available.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and I think the next steps are really important because I can foresee, and I appreciate the flexibility that administration has already had on things like long weekends, saying there's not demand, so we're going to roll that back, and you see the impacts of that. With the next steps, I think it really is a combination of assessing the individual services and their effectiveness of being open in the different platforms on extended hours, and the need for marketing and letting people know what services are open, especially if people are coming and looking to access a service but not aware that that's not one particularly open. So I know that the financial impact has been handled within existing budgets and then a marketing campaign. So do you see that marketing campaign being sustained in the future to address the questions of what services are open, what ones do you want to promote more, so that you can make the best possible decisions on wise use of resources?
Thank you, and through the chair, so this $90,000 investment gave us some assets in terms of banners and those kinds of things that we continue to use and can reuse. Part of our work in the next steps is really looking at that targeted communication, and as with most things, we take a low-cost, no-cost approach to that, so piggybacking on other communication vehicles, our calendars, those kinds of things, to really try and be clear with people on what services are open. So be clear in Spectrum when the hours of Parks and Recreation are available. I think there's some work between Mr. Kotsifis and myself from the business community in terms of more targeted information to that community about the service that's available later into the evening on Tuesdays. We've done some of that, but I think there is more that we could do there for sure.
Great, and I realize this is an information report, so I appreciate it being presented to us, giving us an update and answering all the questions today.
Councillor Van Holst and then Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had a couple of questions through you to staff. I looked at the services and was kind of dividing the customers by the number of hours to figure out how long is it going to take until you see the next customer and or hear from them. In some cases it's 10 minutes and in other cases it's a couple of days. So I'm wondering are there any of those services that we think we're going to just end at this point? I'm wondering about specifically planning services, maybe the people that go after those are generally in the business and do it during the week. So perhaps a comment on that.
Ms. Livingston.
Through the chair, I think we're, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Fleming, but if you'll recall, the tree bylaw is relatively new, and so we've had an initial year of experience with offering a service with that bylaw, and so I think we're anticipating that there may be further uptake in the hours that are available beyond our more traditional hours, for example, on a weekend where people may wish to have the tree bylaw assessed from a permit perspective. So I don't believe Mr. Fleming is at the point of considering ending that service on the Saturday or the extended hours during the week. I think it's understanding more about what the uptake might be.
Okay, thank you. And just to get a sense of the magnitude of the customer interactions, we said it was 6,736 interactions during the extended hours. Do we have the number of what that would be during regular hours?
Through the chair, unfortunately, we do not. We don't have a baseline across all service areas to be able to compare this. However, I can speak to my own service area of Children's Services because I had that very question. I wanted to understand if the traffic we were seeing in the hour and a half on Tuesdays was more or less or the same from what we might see during a more traditional day. And I can say to you that in Children's Services, it is on par with what we would see during our traditional hours of service. So we're seeing and serving about the same number of customers during that hour and a half that we would see during a more traditional day. I can't speak to the other service areas. This is some of the work that we can do as we continue to move forward and try to refine how best to serve our customers and make it as accessible as we can.
Okay, that will give us an excellent sense of how effective this is being. And just following up on one of Councillor Morgan's questions, are we marrying people on the weekend? Is that a service that's happening?
Ms. Saunders?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we are not. The reason we are issuing marriage licenses on the weekend, but we are not providing ceremonies because we only have one manager working, who is also supervising the one clerk staff. And so we need to be on the phones and at the counter and provide signatures for commissioner's oath and that. So at this point, we are not offering ceremonies on the weekends.
So you can get permission to get married, but you actually can't get married.
The other reason, Mr. Chair, is we don't want to be competing with the private sector on Saturdays, who traditionally provide the ceremonies on Saturdays. So we're always conscious of not competing with the private sector.
So just so we know, what time does that service permission open on Saturdays?
For marriage licenses, we are open 8:30 to 4:30
Okay,
on
just so you know,
Saturdays.
8:30 to 4:30, and then you can get married that evening somewhere else. Councillor Helmer.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and if I may. And so do we think that our service has actually compete with those other services? Because I know there's people
Councillor,
who want to be.
can we stay on point here? It's on our service delivery, not whether it competes with someone else, so, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry, I think that is on point, but it's something I can ask at council if you prefer.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. You asked a bunch of questions. I just kind of checked them off. You already asked the ones I wanted to ask, which is very helpful. One thing that's along the same lines is whether we have sort of established or want to establish some kind of threshold for, you know, we're looking for this kind of target number of interactions per 10 hours or something, so we can kind of track what it is we're hoping to get in terms of customer interactions. I know there's lots of work that city staff do. You know, part of it is interacting with customers who come in for transactions, and part of it is not that. And it depends on the service area. Sometimes when one customer interaction can take a really long time. I see one of our business connectors up in the gallery, and I know that you sit down and you can talk for a very long time with somebody who's trying to set up a new business versus coming in and getting a marriage license that might just take a few minutes. It doesn't necessarily take a really long time. So for each of these areas, and even within the areas, there's different services. Have we talked about that to say, you know, what is the sort of threshold where we would say, look, this is not making a whole lot of sense? I think that forestry one, for example, 6 contacts in 100 hours, that's not very many. So I think having some kind of standards or, you know, parameters around which you'd say if it drops below this point, you know, we're gonna have to look at scaling back the hours or redeploying people.
Through the chair, again, with some of the services like the forestry one, it is a relatively new one that we're bringing forward, so we're learning with it. But I think if you look at the next steps, we certainly got to do some market research on what services. and maybe the hours aren't correct. Maybe they should be on different days. And the days that have been picked for purpose, but we may need to look at that as well, because we want to meet the services of the customers. Now, that comes also down to what's the area that's providing the service. So we've got a difference between the business community and residential. And we already mentioned about the Parks and Recreation one, which is more of a, I want to sign up type of thing, and more of a specific, consistent interaction. The appointment ones are more of a consistent interaction because they are appointment times. But some of the interactions are very difficult to gauge. So, you know, one email can take you an hour to deal with, or it could take you 2 minutes. One phone call can take you an hour to deal with, or it could be 2 minutes, as you indicated. So those are the harder ones to deal with, and it very much depends on the inquiry and on the service area. But I think looking at the next steps, I think you can see we are suggesting that we move forward. We think there is value in this. We think that in certain areas, obviously, it's proving to be greatly valuable. In other areas, not so much, and we need to look at those areas and see why.
Okay, one piece of commentary, I think in terms of doing a bit more analysis and then to feed into the marketing, you know, I could imagine, just to pick an example, when I pop up to the 7th floor, there's sometimes a line because there's a lot of people trying to get their permits and go through that whole process. It's generally not a very big line, people work very quickly, but I imagine if there's times of day when you can come by and it's unlikely that you're gonna have a line and you're not waiting around, that appeal very much to people who are, you know, the busy people, they don't wanna stand around in lines. So, you know, where there are examples of services where we have a lot of demand during the week and then on the weekend it's perhaps a little bit less and you can get through quicker, you know, I think that's really compelling to people. So even doing some kind of audit or sampling to say, you know, we looked at a typical week and we say, you know, normally you wait for 3 minutes and you wait no minutes, you know, if you come in on a Saturday for the same kind of work. I think that would be helpful in terms of getting people interested in and even and out across, right? Make it a little less stressful during the week for the employees and a little bit better customer experience for everyone coming in to get permits. So I don't know if that one is actually true, but it seems like there might be something there. I really appreciate the report, and I'm glad we, you know, it's taken a while to get to this point. I think having some plan in advance of rolling out these hours probably would have been helpful to be like, this is what we're thinking is going to happen, and then we could compare against the plan. But having this information now helps us understand what's working, what's not working. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anything else on this report? I'll take a motion. Oh, Councillor Cassidy, I'm sorry. I'll still take a motion.
Thanks for recognizing me, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question through you to Ms. Livingston. I just wanted to clarify the volume of traffic for her area through you. Did you say, so in the 1.5 hours, it's comparable to what you would get in an entire day?
Through the chair, the question I was trying to answer is the traffic we're seeing in the 1.5 hours on the Tuesdays similar to what we might see in an 1.5 hour period of a traditional day? And in our look at that, it was very similar.
Thank you. That's good. But I still think that that's pretty impressive and demonstrates a need, at least in your service area, and perhaps because it's still only a few months old, the uptake will increase as the time goes on. I have a question through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Hayward. Is there any thought going forward as we refine or any ability, any thought of perhaps allowing employees to be on call? So if the majority is phone calls or emails, could they not do that at home rather than come into City Hall? If that would be preferable, I know, you know, some people might want to be home on their Saturday, be with their family, and if they have to take a couple of phone calls throughout the day, I'm just wondering if that's something that might be considered.
So through the chair, there has been discussion in various organizations, I know, about work-at-home policies. I know it has been explored a little bit, but we haven't taken it any further than that at this point. Certainly when you have the counter experience, it's usually face-to-face that we're open for, so being present at a counter at a city facility is what we're really looking for. But if you start talking about email responses, then you know, that would be another area, and we need to explore that and look at that from a labor relations point of view.
Okay, the report's been moved and seconded. If there's no other discussion, I'll call the question.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, we have a couple of counselor submissions. So we'll deal with item number 8, which is a review of code of conduct. Counselor Morgan and Counselor Ridley, this is your submission. It's pretty straightforward. Do you want to comment? Or you can just move it.
I'd be happy to move it. I'd also be happy to hear any comments that our city manager may have, since he's the one being directed and tasked with this. So maybe for simplicity, I'll start off asking the city manager if he has any comments. Happy to move it and second it, and we'll debate if the committee feels that that's necessary.
So through the chair, I believe that the recommendation is asking me to report back on changes, potential changes to the code of conduct that would see any complaints concerning the city manager or the chief human resources officer go to an independent individual that could report directly to council and pursue the investigation. I'm okay with taking that forward and looking at it. I think there are no issues, and so now may be a good time to look at it. So I think that the process that we have in place at the city, I just want to go on record as saying I think is a very good one. I think we have some really a good investigator on staff, and the process is very fair as it stands. But again, enhancing that transparency, I think is a good thing.
Sure, and I'll be happy to move that. The only comment I'll make initially, and I'll weigh in the debate with more discussion if my colleagues would like, is certainly both Councillor Ridley and myself feel in no way that this reflects negatively on any member of the senior leadership team in any sort of way. We have full confidence in what you're doing. It's really how the city manager articulated it, and that is improving a process at a time that is appropriate to do so, and strengthening it for employees to have confidence in it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe in transparency, and I think that if this passes, it will allow a little bit more transparency, at least A. I don't quite understand B, though, and I'd like to ask for a little bit more explanation, particularly where it says to seek support during and after the completion of the process. I'm not so sure what that means, and I wonder if the mover would be able to explain that a little bit for my purposes.
Sure. In the current process, it's not clear, and quite frankly not defined, what level of supports an individual making a complaint could engage in. In fact, the complaint is supposed to be completely confidential, meaning it would be very difficult to speak to anybody about it. So outlining a process in a written way so that the employees know, how do I get supports, who can I talk to, how do I get recommendations on guiding through the process, is an appropriate support for those in it, so that they don't feel like they're in a position that they will breach the code of conduct simply by talking to their colleagues about the process that they're going through. And so I would see this part as an enhancement to the current process in a formal way.
No, and I'm sure that that's the intent. My other side of the coin there then is that, does this support include financial or legal support, etc.? This can be assumed that would be involved. So I just want to know now whether that's what we're talking about.
Maybe that question would be best answered by our city manager or our chief human resource officer.
Again, through the chair, the question would be part of what we bring back. If there's a financial implication here, we would certainly make you aware of that. I wouldn't suggest we necessarily go down that road just off the top right now, but at the same time, There are other supports that you can put in place, but I wouldn't preclude anything at this point, and we'll report back to you. I don't know if Mr. Coxhead has anything to add.
Mr. Coxhead.
Thank you through the chair. I think the city manager has captured appropriately. We'll have a look at what types of supports would be considered and how best to put them in place. And if there's costs associated with that, we'll bring that back to before committee and council.
Thank you.
Of course, employee assistance program's always available, right? So that would be one element of it. Mayor Brown.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Hubert. I'm happy to second the motion. I think that we have spent a good deal of time this year modernizing many policies, procedures, and practices, and this is one that is a good one to take a look at too. I won't say much more than that other than to thank Councillor Morgan and Ridley for bringing this forward.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for welcoming me to your committee. I'm glad that there appears to be some support for this. I was hoping that there'd be unanimous support because it is part of modernization and making sure that we have the appropriate policies in place. I did raise my hand to speak to Councillor Usher's question, but I feel like he is satisfied with the response he got. But I did want to speak in regards to the intent of the motion. I know how staff are interpreting it, but I think the intent was simply, as Mr. Hayward indicated, it's about reporting back. I don't think that there was an intent that there'd be a financial implication to this per se, but at present, should an employee be in a situation, they could actually be breaching the code of conduct by going to another employee to report the situation they're experiencing. So that's where we need clarity. We need to know, who can they go to and what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. And I think that needs to be clearly defined. I think there's a difference between accessing support from a colleague, whether they be a supervisor or on the same level with them, as there's a difference to going to the cafeteria and having a discussion with 50 people. But that needs to be clear to employees who they can access, what's, what is okay and what the alternate routes are. So that's really what my intent was in that part. It wasn't about an external resource.
Okay. If I may, from the chair, I think this is good. I think also there may be a resource in our integrity commissioner to provide some feedback on it in terms of just codes of conduct. And certainly he's looking at council's code of conduct. He may have some resource and some input on that as well. But I think this is a good move. Anytime we get clarity, and we're seeing it in the media on an almost weekly basis where organizations haven't instituted processes that assist people to come forward and deal with issues that need to be dealing with. And so I think this is a very good step forward. So thank you, councillors, for bringing this forward. And if there's no further discussion, I'll call the question on this one.
Motion carries 6-0.
And we'll turn to the next item, which is a potential fraud, waste, and misuse of asset resources of the municipality policy. I have a couple comments on this myself, so I may yield the chair at some point in this discussion. Once again, Councillor Morgan, I'll turn to you and you can introduce your motion. And I see Councillor Ridley's already waving, but he's on the committee, so I'll head it over to you afterwards, Councillor.
Sure. I know Councillor Ridley will want to speak to this as well. So the one thing I want to contextualize in the discussion is that what we're asking for is for a review and report back with a recommended process. The resources that the city manager will have at his disposal is a whole range of other municipalities who engaged in these sorts of processes. There are best practices out there. Municipalities including Windsor, Mississauga, Toronto, Oakville, Ottawa, Sudbury, to name a few, all have different processes that allow for these complaints to come forward to the benefit of the corporation and ensure that they are dealt with in an effective and a fair and transparent way. So I wanted to make sure that that colleagues know that we're not asking for anything new here. In fact, I think that there will be some significant best practices that can be reviewed by our city manager and brought forward, and he's got colleagues in other cities that he can liaise with in finding out what works and what doesn't.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Chair. I was hoping to get ahead of Councillor Morgan on this one, thinking that we could take turns, but he is a member of the committee, and I am not, so I will take second chair here.
You get the third letter.
So I think, Councillor Morgan lined this up well. I think I'd be open to hearing anything that Mr. Hayward says about it. But I know one of the things that I often learn when I travel out of town and when I meet with other colleagues are things that they're doing and things that are effective. And so I think that this could go in a lot of different directions. I think we already have some committees that would be very appropriate to bring information back to. And I think that Mr. Hayward has a number of resources available to him that he can bring something back to us. I think, from a policy point of view, the best time to put some of these things in place is ahead of a problem. And that's why I think it's important that we look at potential recommendations, processes, and policies, and get them in place now, and covering off some areas that there may be concerns, right? And I think that Mr. Hayward and I have had a couple of discussions. This isn't a roundabout on anything else that we already have, including our labor relations and all of that. I think there's some good protocols that are out there. And I think that we can look at those and we can learn from those, and it'll help us that other people have already paved the way in putting processes in place.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I'm not surprised to see this here, actually. I pulled an old report that harkens back to, I think, my first year as Chair of Audit back in 2008 and 2009, which I don't even think it's online, so I'll provide all of you with a copy of that afterwards. And it was called at that time the Ethics and Waste Hotline. And there's a really good report that I think staff could almost cut and paste from and then update some of the best practices charts from then. And it really clearly outlines some of the considerations in this. To whom does it report? Where does those reports go? Is it for the public, or is it just for internal use? Those are the types of questions. And one of the significant ones is how much, and what's the cost of this? Is it in those years? It was the estimation in this report was authored by Don Ikeno. For those of you who are around, Don is now the internal auditor for one of the municipalities in Hawaii. So Don has moved to a warmer spot, and Tom Johnson. And interestingly enough, at that time we were talking around $40,000 to $50,000 a year, based on the experiences of some municipalities. Some climbed up over $100,000. So I certainly am supportive of this because I think it allows us to look for opportunities for savings. I think it's opportunities for us to explain the work that we do, because oftentimes there's misunderstandings about the work that we do. I think there's an opportunity for education in that. And I think also there's an opportunity for us to increase our transparency and engage our staff. One of the things that's outstanding in the report, in any place that this has been successfully implemented, is that the unions, our unionized staff and their leadership are part of the process from the get-go. This is not about gotcha. This is about continuous improvement, and so I'm supportive of it. I think it's a good thing, but I do look forward to answers to all of those questions coming back in the future. And for my colleagues, I'll ask Ashley to make a copy of this available to you, because it's a little harder to find on the web at this time. So thank you.
I have Councillor Usher. Just look for more comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really happy to hear my colleagues and listen to my colleagues here because ever since this term started, I've been advocating that we mix and mingle with other municipalities through some of the associations. And I know that at the beginning it wasn't taken so generously, but along the way, I noticed that many of us have decided to join different organizations out there rather than just sitting around the horseshoe. And this is the way we learn best practices from other places and share our best practices with other places. So I'm really happy to hear that tune coming from the mover and the second. With all due respect to both of them. Thank you very much. Just had to say that.
Okay, sounds like we're all in agreement. Perhaps we have a motion, moved and seconded. I'll turn the chair back over to Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, folks, we've got a few quick ones here. Tequila Expo Show. Municipally significant event. Someone want to move that? Councillor Usher, are you moving that? No. You want to speak to the tequila? Go ahead. Just make sure it's not the tequila speaking.
Well, I certainly didn't have any tequila before I came here, I can assure you that. You all know that I'm wary about these organizations coming in and asking for these permission for significant event. I have a great deal of respect for any of these organizations come through. I never heard about the Tequila Expo Show before. And generally, my understanding of when they come and ask, when any organization come and ask for us to look at this as an event, particular event, it's because they're looking to apply for a liquor license. Now, this one is going to be held at the Budweiser Garden. Doesn't the Budweiser Garden have a liquor license? So why is it that they need a separate license for this? Why can't they, if it's going to be in that same building, they not use the same license? I don't know who can answer that question, but it just seemed to me that
Councilor,
it should be able to happen.
I'll look for some clarification on it, but it's in partnership with the Budweiser Gardens. It doesn't actually say exactly where it's going to be, and if it's outside of the Budweiser Gardens, then they will have to have this. That's usually the reason for it, so it's outside. And correct me if I'm wrong, clerk, please.
The event is being held at that venue, but it's not being held by the Budweiser Gardens. It's being held independently by this group, the Tequila Expo Show organizers. So they themselves have to acquire, under the AGCO rules, they themselves have to be licensed. They can't piggyback on someone else's license who is not in effect running that event.
So the way I get this here, it's a tasting event. But the fact that it's alcohol. So in order to provide alcohol, whether it's free or purchased, they have to have a license. And they cannot get a license without being a significant event. Is this what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and the clerk assures me that we're in the process of bringing forward some rules and regulations, so this can be a delegated responsibility to the clerk. Okay, I'll take a motion.
Motion carries 5-1.
And we have several confirmation of appointments. Can we do these all together? Yeah, two separate.
There are two confirmations of appointment. They're pretty straightforward in that it's organizations, so it's a matter of confirmation. There's not a selection to be made.
So can we, I think it's two councillors, items 11 and 12, items 11 and 12 together, okay? Take a motion on that. And I'll call it.
Recommendations 11 and 12 carry 6-0.
And further to that, item number 13 is a request by Scott Jackson that we place the question of whether the public wants bus rapid transit on the ballot as a referendum. Councillor Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, would move that we note and file this request. In terms of Shift Rapid Transit, I would say that council's pretty far down the garden path on this project. As you note earlier in the agenda, we put a hefty budget submission forward to both the federal and provincial government. I know that most members of council campaigned on improving transit, so that's where we got the mandate from the public going forward. So I move that we note and file that.
File, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd be happy to second that motion. I think we need to be really clear that in 2014, this was a significant focus of the municipal election. Certainly, it was a significant part of my platform. Also, we all understand that this is the foundation of the London Plan. So the commitments, I think, were made to the community as a part of the 2014 election. And what we're doing now is following through on those commitments. So I'd be happy to second the motion here.
I just want to add to what my two colleagues said, Mr. Chair. We've been on this for the past 11 years now. It's not new, and we've had lots of discussions on it, and we've just gone a little too far. And I certainly agree that really in the past two elections we've talked about this, but more so in the 2014, it was a real massive focus. So I fully agree that we should just note and file. Thanks.
Okay, call a question. Can I have a seconder, please? Call a question.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, folks, is there any other additional business or deferred matters? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to go in camera. For our guests, we're going to go in camera. We've got 4 items. We will probably not come back in here because they'll, or was there there may be a report out on that. Will there be a report out? Yeah, we'll report out from committee rooms, so we won't be coming back in here. Thanks for coming. I hope it was informative and maybe just a little bit entertaining as well. Okay, have a great afternoon. Motion to go in camera. Mover and seconder, please. Please assist the clerk by logging out of your computers.
After you vote. After you vote.
After you vote.
Motion carries 6-0, and the reasons for in camera are as included on the agenda and the added agenda. The first 2 items being on the agenda, 2 added items as noted on the added agenda and published on the city's website.